Hey everyone, welcome to another Clean Machine Live. I'm Geoff Palmer, CEO and founder of Clean Machine. Did you know that there was a new study that showed taking fish oil supplements increases risk of atrial fibrillation, or more commonly called AFib, and that AFib is shown to be associated with a 63% increased risk of having a heart attack? We're going to talk about the fish oil industry's rebuttal to this study. Why does fish oil actually do this? Is it fish oil or is it the DHA? And why plant-based omegas are actually better and superior to fish and algae oil supplements for omegas. Okay, so first, before we jump into the study, here's a couple things to consider when you're taking fish oil supplements. One, that fish, or eating fish, by the way. One, we have nuclear radiation dumps going on a regular basis. And the worst one we've seen in quite a while is, of course, Fukushima. We have fish that are so radioactive in the ocean that they cannot or should not be eaten and could potentially immediately cause cancer in humans. We have oil spills. We have plastics. We have a plastic load the size of Texas floating out in the oceans right now. We have mercury and heavy metal poisoning from dumping of materials into the ocean. We have pollution and runoffs from waste from agricultural systems and waste and pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, all running off into the water systems and eventually making it to the oceans. And we have pharmaceutical drugs that are showing up. They did a study in Florida, University of Gainesville, did a study looking at bonefish that they caught all the way around the coast of Florida, from the Gulf side to the Atlantic side. And they found that up to 14 different pharmaceutical drugs were found in every single one of the fish they caught. These were Lipitor, they were antidepressants, they were birth control. A lot of these are actually coming through the people, going into the urine, out into the ocean through the sewage. So the fish are loaded with pharmaceutical drugs, pollution, heavy metals and mercury, lead, plastics, oil spills, and nuclear radiation. Not really what I would be interested in putting in my mouth, but let's jump into the study. Okay, first, what is AFib and why is it so important in human health? Okay, before we get started, this video is for informational and educational purposes only and is not intended to diagnose, cure, treat, or prevent any disease. Okay, so let's take a look at the study. Here we go. Sorry. Okay, here's the study. So this study caused a big stink. Let me put it up on the screen. So it's a 2024 study, so it just came out. And it caused a big stink and an uproar amongst the fish oil and fish industries because it puts a lot of fear in people should they be taking a fish oil supplement at all. So the title of the study is Regular Use of Fish Oil Supplements and a Course of Cardiovascular Diseases, a prospective cohort study. Okay, let's take a look at the basics of the study. There was 415,000 people, almost 416,000 people, aged 40 to 69 years, with almost a 12-year follow-up. So one, it's a really big study, inclusive of 415,000 people, and it was a long-term study, and it included broad stroke age groups. Okay, this is what they found in the study. For people without cardiovascular disease, those are normal, healthy people, they increase their risk of AFib by 13%. So this is a bit concerning because it also increased their risk of stroke by about 5%. Now, I'm not going to immediately address the stroke, though it's something we should be concerned with because it's such a small percent. I want to take a look at the 13% of AFib because, like we said, AFib can actually increase cardiovascular risk health too as well. Okay, so the conclusion of the study was regular use of fish oil supplements might be a risk factor for atrial fibrillation or AFib and stroke amongst the general population. So this was in healthy people, not people with cardiovascular disease, not people with advanced disease states. This is normal people with no cardiovascular disease. Okay. So this is why AFib should be a concern. As a part of the atherosclerosis risk in communities study, 5 studies, including participants free of coronary heart disease at baseline, atrial fibrillation was associated with a 63% increased risk of incidence of myocardial infarction or a heart attack. 63%. That's why AFib is so important. And that's why increasing your risk of AFib simply by taking a fish oil supplement by 13% is really not a good thing if we are concerned about cardiovascular risk. So, of course, the fish oil and fish industry is going to respond to this, trying to debunk it, trying to poke holes in the study because they don't want this study making big headlines, but it's already too late. It already has. So this was the rebuttal article. The industry responds to a recent study suggesting that fish oil usage elevates cardiovascular risk. There's the link below in the green, so you can always stop the video and copy the link or type in the link in Google if you want to read the article yourself. So this is a quote from that article. William Harris, who is the president of the Fatty Acid Research Institute, FARI, calls the negative headlines resulting from the study a serious misrepresentation of not only this specific study, but the field at large. Okay, so he's making a pretty broad claim here based on one study's results. Now, he went on to say that one study is not enough to draw far-reaching conclusions. And this was an observational study, a cohort. So it wasn't a randomized controlled study. So, and he mentioned that in the article too. Hey, it's not randomized controlled. 2, it's only one study. So those were his big, serious comments of why we shouldn't take this study seriously. Okay, so being that he is a PhD and president of the Fatty Acid Research Institute, I'm sure he's read this study. Study in 2021, just a couple of years ago, omega-3 supplementation linked with atrial fibrillation risk, a meta-analysis. So this is not one study, this is multiple studies. And including in this study was 5 randomized placebo-controlled trials. So 5 RCTs, just exactly what he was saying we should be looking at. Wait here, sort of keep knocking that. Had 50,000 patients and between 2 and 7.4 years. So again, a big group of people, a lot of years over time. And the researchers found that omega-3 fatty acid supplementation, we're talking about specifically fish oil here, was associated with significantly increased risk for atrial fibrillation compared to placebo, with an incidence rate of 1.37. That is a 37% increased risk. Remember, the first study that they're attacking was one study at 13% increased risk, and yet here's a meta-analysis looking at 5 different randomized controlled trials, 5 different studies, meta-analysis, 37% increased risk of AFib. So not just one study. And yes, these were RCTs. And yes, it was multiple RCTs. Okay, well, if that's not enough for you, how about this one? And look, you can just Google, AFib and fish oil AFib. Just put in those 2 words and study. And you can see all these studies. This is another 2021 study, and it is also a systematic review and meta-analysis. This one was 7 different studies in it. And this one is the effect of long-term marine, meaning fish oil or other sources of like krill or things like that, marine fatty acid supplementation on the risk of atrial fibrillation in RCTs of cardiovascular outcomes. Okay, let's look at what they found. First, let's see what it was. It was 7 RCTs, randomized controlled trials, 81,000 people in almost 5 years. So long-term, big group of people, 7 randomized controlled trials, another meta-analysis. Not a single study, it's looking at many different studies, 7 different studies. And they found, just like the other studies, the use of marine fatty acid fish oil supplements was associated with an increased risk of atrial fibrillation of 25% increased health risk. So again, almost twice as much as the first study that they're claiming, oh, this is not a good study because it's not enough. This is actually 7 studies showing an average of 25% increased risk of atrial fib. But it gets worse. In this same study, the analysis, when it's stratified by dose, meaning if you took more of the fish oil, did they get worse? And then sure enough, they did. At 1 gram or a day of fish oil, which is a higher dose, considered a higher dose, 49% increased risk of atrial fibrillation. Huge. It's 50% risk, increased risk. Remember, if you're increasing your risk of AFib by 50%, and this 7 study meta-analysis, 50% increased risk, that means 1 out of 2 people are increasing their risk of getting AFib, and that can lead to a 63% increased risk of a heart attack. This is something very serious, and look, it just goes on and on. The conclusions of this study, this 2021 study, in RCTs examining cardiovascular outcomes, marine omega-3 supplementation, fish oil, was associated with an increased risk of AFib. The risk appeared to be greater with the greater amounts. So it gets worse as you increase the amount of fish oil that you're taking. So it's even dose specific. It's showing that there is a cause and effect. If you get if you get an effect out of something at a lower dose and you get a higher effect out of a higher dose, you can see a causality there. A lower dose has a little bit of harm, a higher dose has a lot of harm. Well, then it's doing harm. It is resulting in that. And the more you're taking of the fish oil, the worse risk, a higher risk you have of getting AFib. And it goes on. Here's a more recent study. Those are both 2021 meta-analyses. This one is an omega-3 study all by itself, and their conclusion shows omega-3 fatty acid supplementation, they're talking again about fish oil here, just to be specific, is associated with increased risk of atrial fibrillation, particularly in trials that use high doses. So this is another review looking at all the studies and saying, hey, wait a minute, even in 2023, so 2 years later, they're still finding the effects of this. Okay, so why are we getting this? And why specifically with fish oil? Okay, so why they were always saying marine sources of omega-3 in these studies? This is very important. So they're saying marine sources of omega-3 because that's from animals. Animals make DHA. DHA is one of the omega-3s we all know is important for brain health. But our body can make its own DHA. We don't actually need to consume it in its pre-formed state, formed outside of our body. Our body can form it inside of our body. So we don't need to be putting it into our digestive tract, and more importantly, dumping it from consumption into our bloodstream. And the more we dump into the bloodstream, the higher the risk. So why is the DHA maybe the problem? Well, let's take a look at this study, and this is a recent study. It's a 2023 study, the effect of omega-3 PUFAs on cardiovascular outcomes in patients with diabetes. So this is also a meta-analysis of randomized controlled trials. Remember, randomized controlled trials is better than cohorts, which is just looking at observation. What do we see when we look at a bunch of people and see what happens? Okay, this is actually a controlled study where we're saying, okay, let's give people this and see what happens. That means you're actually an interventional study, right? Okay, well, a meta-analysis is above that in its quality, because it's saying, hey, let's look at all the different randomized controlled trials and see if there's a pattern here. That will give us even more confidence that we're seeing something in the studies is not an aberration, not a poor quality study or something like that. If there's consistency across a lot of different studies, that's why meta-analysis, looking at many different studies, is so much more valuable in the research community. Okay, so this one actually looked at 8 different studies. Again, 57,000 people. So these are big numbers. We're looking at the studies. And they showed in this research consistently through the studies, the 8 different studies, 57,000 people, DHA increases LDL cholesterol in the bloodstream, whereas EPA actually does the opposite. Now, here's where it gets interesting. When you take fish oil, you are dumping DHA into the bloodstream where it can increase LDL cholesterol. Now, LDL cholesterol can seep into the endothelium, the lining of the arteries, and then cause plaques, which will constrict the blood flow, causing hypertension, high blood pressure, and atherosclerosis. Atherosclerosis can then lead to heart attacks. So you see the chain of events here. That's the DHA that may be contributing to this chain of events that we're seeing. That's why we're seeing this high risk of only omega-3s from fish oil. Now, if DHA is actually the problem, this means that algae oil, even though it's vegan, may be contributing to the same thing, because you're taking preformed DHA just like the fish oil and dumping it into the bloodstream, which could increase LDL cholesterol. Now let's dig deeper into the study, and it says among them EPA. Okay, ALA from plants converts to EPA heavily in the bloodstream. So that's never been a question. We get all the EPA we want from plants, all that we need from plants. And EPA has benefits on cardiovascular health, benefits for heart health, benefits for endothelial health, reducing inflammation. Now, this is where the interesting part of the study says, it says, among them EPA, but not EPA plus DHA, significantly reduce the risk of cardiovascular disease in patients with diabetes. So as soon as you put the DHA in there, like you get from fish oil, poof, the health benefits of the EPA actually evaporate. We're going to see even a scarier example of this. This is one study, but let's take a look at this study. Higher DHA levels lower the protective impact of EPA on MACE. MACE stands for major adverse cardiovascular events, like heart attacks or stroke, in those without an angiographic cath, basically don't have heart disease to begin with. Okay. The conclusion of the study is that higher EPA, good for cardiovascular health, but not DHA. What? The study goes on to say, when combined with EPA, DHA blunts the benefit of EPA and increases major adverse cardiovascular events. It's the DHA in the fish oil that may be actually leading to this increased risk of Afib, increased risk of major adverse cardiovascular events, could be related to the increased risk for heart attacks. We see that when you consume ALA from plants, you get a big dose of EPA conversion in the bloodstream. That's been clinically proven in multiple human studies. We know that. But what we saw is that not much of that ALA from the plants is converted into DHA in the bloodstream. Now, this is really important because it may be that humans shouldn't be getting a high dose of DHA in the bloodstream. Remember what we saw in those previous articles, that when you increase DHA in the bloodstream, it increased the risk of Afib. You went from 25% risk of Afib with DHA at lower levels. When you increase the DHA from fish oil, boom, 50%, 49% increased risk of Afib, which then had a 63% increased risk of heart attacks. Boom. It's the DHA, and it doesn't belong in our bloodstream. Okay. But what about plant-based omegas? Well, this study actually shows that plant-based omega-3s may actually boost heart health and reduce the risk of heart disease, because the plant-based omegas don't convert to DHA in the bloodstream. Our body prefers to convert that DHA in tissues when it's out of the bloodstream. This is really important because when we're consuming animal products, we're getting preformed DHA, and that DHA can negatively impact our cardiovascular system. Our body does not want DHA. If you give it ALA, it'll only convert it mostly to EPA. It'll convert 0.2% to DHA. So just a little bit for necessary purposes. But 47 times more of that DHA is converted in our tissues, where it's safe away from the bloodstream. And we see now this increase in cardiovascular events, this increase in Afib, when you include DHA in its preformed state from marine sources like fish, from animal products, and it's in most animal products, eggs, dairy, fish, all of it, but also in algae. And this is why I would never and have never taken a preformed algae DHA. You could be increasing the risk of cardiovascular disease, heart disease, coronary heart disease, atrial fibrillation. Just awful. And we're seeing this in this. So this study on the plant-based omegas saw something pretty interesting. It found that consuming ALA was associated with a 10% lower risk of cardiovascular disease and 20% reduced risk of fatal dying from coronary heart disease. So you're looking at fish oil actually increasing AFib risk up to 50%, while plant omegas are reducing risk of fatal coronary heart disease by 20%. Now, which would you want to take? It becomes really clear. Now, this is where it's interesting. This study also says, but when people with already high levels of omega-3 from other sources, like fish or algae, ate more or consumed more ALA from plants, they also saw a benefit. So the benefit is coming from the ALA and the EPA, and potentially the SDA, from the plants specifically, above and beyond any health benefits that you might get from consuming fish oil. So the plants are actually superior to the preformed DHA-laden fish oil or algae oils. ALA is better. ALA is what our body was built to do, to convert it only to EPA, mostly, predominantly to EPA, to help our cardiovascular system, and keeps that DHA out of the bloodstream so it can be converted in tissues where it's safely converted and safely delivered to tissues. Let's go ahead and actually take a look at the study that shows this. Here's the first study I want to show and talk to you about. Oh, let me take down the caption. Okay, so this study, serum, that's your bloodstream, underestimates dietary ALA conversion. That's how much your body is actually converting in the bloodstream compared to how much is actually being converted to DHA in the tissues, like liver tissue, fat tissues, other organs, brain tissues. 47 times more DHA is made in our body, out of the bloodstream, than what's in our bloodstream. If you look at the little yellow dot right there, 0.2% is converted in the bloodstream. Why? Because our body does not want pre-converted DHA in the bloodstream where it can increase LDL cholesterol, increase your risk of Afib, increase your risk of heart attacks. This is a profound physiological evidence that humans are meant to be consuming our omegas from plants, where it safely converts only to EPA in the bloodstream, where it can positively impact our cardiovascular health, and then is shuttled to the liver, to the fat tissues, to the heart and brain, where it can then be converted safely out of the bloodstream to DHA by 47 times. So we are getting more DHA than we need because it's being converted. This is why the blood tests that we are seeing are false. They are wrong. And we know this to be true. Here's another example. This study, they said, okay, if that's the case, if you give the body DHA, it's called triglyceride or tag DHA, and the red blood cells will soak it up. So if you look at the bottom two graphs and you look at the black dots, that is fish oil or tag DHA. That is also algae oil, tag DHA, triglyceride DHA. Okay, you can see the black dots and you can see how much is being soaked up by erythrocytes or red blood cells. A whole bunch of it gets soaked up by red blood cells. Now, if you look at how much is actually being absorbed by the brain on the top two graphs, practically nothing. And this can be seen by if DHA enters the brain, you will see a spike in what's called brain-derived neurotrophic factors. This is what stimulates our brain to actually, heal and repair and electrify our dendrites, the brain cells. So we see this spike in the bloodstream as soon as DHA reaches the brain. When you look at tag DHA, there's really hardly any BDF going on because it's not going to the brain. It's getting soaked up by the red blood cells. So when the industry, fish oil industry, is telling you, oh, you got to get your blood test done, it's going to artificially show by taking fish oil, oh, look at all that DHA in your blood. Right, great. Well, what good is that? The body needs to take it and deliver it to the liver and convert it to LPC, which is a lipophosphatidylcholine type of DHA. This crosses the blood-brain barrier, gets into our brain, and helps our brain utilize that DHA. Now, if you look at the red dots on the top graph, you can see how much is actually reaching the brain. Black dots, that's fish oil. Red dots, that's DHA created in the liver, just like ALA from plants would do. The ALA does not convert in the bloodstream. Instead, it gets taken to the liver, converted to LPC DHA, and delivered to the brain. You can see the red dots much higher on both graphs in the cerebral cortex as well as the hippocampus of the brain. So you're getting a lot more stimulation of it from ALA than you would this fish oil that's just getting soaked up by the red blood cells. Now, if you look at the LPC, the good DHA, the DHA utilized by the brain, you can see on the bottom graphs, not much of it is actually getting soaked up by the blood cells because they're soaking up the tag DHA instead. So the fish oil industry said, well, wait a minute, this skews the whole data. This gives us a more favorable approach if we tell everybody, oh, the omega-3 index, the blood measurement of red blood cells is what you should believe is how healthy you are based on your DHA levels. And it's false, and they know it. We have the research to show that's absolutely not true. We now know that the proper pathway is the body taking ALA from plants, not converting it into the DHA in the bloodstream where it can do harm, increasing your risk of Afib, heart attacks, stroke, cardiovascular disease, coronary heart disease. This is a big challenge and a big threat to the industry. So they're coming out trying to debunk this, saying, oh, that's just one study. No, it's not. There have been studies for years showing that fish oil increases Afib. There's been many meta-analyses looking at major reviews of multiple randomized control studies. They are either one, don't know the research, which If that's the case, shame on them. They shouldn't be experts in the field of fish of omega-3 nutrition if you haven't read the research. Or number two, they're intentionally lying and misleading you, telling you to go do that omega-3 test so that you purchase more of their product. My guess is the latter. That's a shame that our industry has turned more into about making money than providing the health benefits to people. When we have this amount of data that overwhelmingly shows that fish oil can put people at risk for serious disease states, and not just one study, and not just in an observational cohort. We're talking about randomized controlled studies, interventional studies, meta-analysis of these studies, reviews of these studies, and consistently seeing a much greater increased risk. That 13%, that was actually low compared to what the rest of the research. The rest of the research was showing 25, 37, and 49% increased risk of AFib. So they should be celebrating that they got a study that only showed 13%, but consumers should be greatly concerned that yet another study has shown increased risk of AFib. AFib increases your risk for dying from a heart attack by 63%. People need to wake up. The fish oil is healthy for you is not true. There may be some health benefits as it has EPA in it too. And we know that EPA has good cardiovascular events, but fish oil doesn't just contain EPA. That would be awesome if it did. It doesn't. It's the plants that do that. It's the plants that give you the ALA, which immediately and readily converts to EPA in our bloodstream. That's our body doing what it wants. It says, I want the ALA and I want to regulate what it gets converted into. When you take fish oil, you're dumping preformed DHA into the bloodstream where it doesn't belong. And the body says, I didn't make that. I don't want that made in my bloodstream. I don't want that in my bloodstream. So it uses the red blood cells to try to soak it up and take it out of the bloodstream before it can cause damage. Now, this is not actually getting to the brain because it's the wrong form of DHA. And instead, the ALA that is converted to EPA can then be converted to DHA in the liver or the tissues or other tissues, even in the brain, to DHA safely out of the bloodstream where it won't cause this problem. This is disheartening to me when the industry is intentionally just launched a 2024 study with its tagline saying we need to get more people consuming fish oil, and saying and using a quote unquote study when all it was is a giant marketing piece for OmegaQuant, the company that does the omega-3 testing, saying, oh, everybody should get testing because when we test them, we see people, especially vegetarians and vegans, with really low blood levels of DHA. I'm like, great, that's exactly what our body wants. But they've convinced you that that's a negative. They've convinced you that you should be afraid of that and have to take DHA. Scared vegans are now taking DHA. And even shamefully, disappointingly, many of the vegan doctors are telling people to take preformed DHA when they should not be. If they have read this research, there's no way they would be saying, hey, go ahead and take this supplement. It could increase your risk of AFib by 49%, which could increase your risk of having a fatal heart attack by 63%. No one in their right mind, no real doctor would ever say that. And I'm waiting for these doctors, especially the plant-based community, to get off this algae and tell people the truth, that the studies are out here really showing dangerous risk of taking preformed DHA because our body doesn't want it there. If our body really wanted preformed DHA in our bloodstream, it would make it. It has the capability to make it. And don't tell me about we don't produce enough of the enzyme. That's bunk. That's been blown up many times below in many studies. There are people with ApoE4, it's a genetic flaw that, or variation rather, I shouldn't say flaw, it's a variation that don't produce as much of the enzyme, but that doesn't matter. Just consuming more would overtake that. And let me give you one parallel. Both omega-3 and omega-6 both use delta-6 desaturase. Okay, if it were true that that enzyme that we were too low on, that we don't produce enough of, doesn't convert it down to DHA, and that's the reason why we don't have DHA. If that were true, that same enzyme converts LA, omega-6, down to arachidonic acid through a step-by-step process. So we would all be saying, oh, you must take a DHA supplement, but you also have to take an arachidonic acid supplement. How many doctors, how many professionals have told you you must take an arachidonic acid supplement? None, zero, because arachidonic acid is pro-inflammatory. But wait a minute. If the body doesn't want to convert to arachidonic acid, it simply turns that enzyme off. Oh, wait, interesting. That's why we don't have overwhelmingly high levels of arachidonic acid. That's why we don't need to take arachidonic acid supplements, and it's why we don't need to take DHA supplements either, because our body controls this step-by-step process through epigenetics. It turns a gene on, produce the enzyme, convert it down when it needs it. If our body wanted DHA in the bloodstream, it would make DHA in the bloodstream. It does not. 47 times more DHA is made in tissues to keep it out of the bloodstream. That is what our body is choosing to do, not what we are doing. By taking a DHA supplement, you are overriding your own body's natural will, natural functionality, natural physiology. You're overriding this, and you're telling your body you're going to have DHA in your bloodstream, and it's resulting in these findings that we see of increased Afib. It's time we start telling the truth about this. And look, it's not because I sell omega-3 supplements. I sell omega-3 supplements because I wanted to put out the best plant-based supplement available, one with the highest amount of SDA that bypasses that first rate-limiting enzyme, so that even if you had a genetic variant, you're going to be getting all of the ALA, SDA, ETA, EPA, DHA, all that you need, because it'll skip that bypass. It'll bypass that one step that some people do actually have a genetic variant for. That's why I launched it. That's why it won the Nexty Award. Right there, boom, the Nexty Award for the best ingredient of the year in 2016. And I've been really trying to get people to get away from the algae DHA, to get away from the fish oil, reduce your LDL cholesterol just by getting off that, and reduce your risk and increase the health benefits that we get from ALA, from SDA and EPA for our cardiovascular health. That's why I brought ahi flour to market, why I was one of the first companies in the world to bring ahi flour to market, and why I am the #1 seller of ahi flour on Amazon. Because I believe in what it does, because I believe I want to improve people's health. That's why I do this research, why I present this research. And I hope you enjoyed it. If you do, please give it a thumbs up, give it a like. I want to get this information out to more people. And the only way we can do this is to get likes, comments, and subscriptions on our website at YouTube, Clean Machine Online. You can go to our YouTube channel. Let me go ahead and put that up there so you can see it. Check out our YouTube channel at Clean Machine Online on YouTube. I'll keep doing these videos, looking at the latest research. I'll include debunkings. I'll include difference of opinions and explore why these things may be happening. And again, I say maybe because we need more research. But now we've got enough research to really start to paint a clear picture of what happens to the human body when you put preformed omega-3 DHA into it and it goes into the bloodstream. I even cover the mechanisms of actions, what's happening, and the studies that support these mechanisms, actions, and even the outcomes of these actions. So the studies showing the research, the meta-analyses, and the research showing the outcomes. So you can see what happens, why it potentially is happening, and what the results will be if we continue to do this. It's time we start to wake up and look at this and stop buying the fish oil panacea. It's not. And the studies are backing it, and it's time for a change. It's time to start telling people the truth. You heard it here. Please spread this information, tag people in the comments section so that they can take a look at this. We really need to get this information out because it's hurting people, and there's better options out there. It's better to work with our physiology, let our own body decide when and where to do the conversions, because it wants to do so for very specific reasons to keep us healthy. Our body's trying to keep us healthy, and we keep overriding that by taking things that don't belong there. I hope you enjoyed this. Again, I'll keep going with this information until it becomes out there, and until those doctors out there start to change their mind, start to change their tune. I'm very fortunate that I'll be speaking with, hopefully be speaking with in November, Dr. Milton Mills. I speak regularly with Dr. Frank Sabatino, who also truly understand this information about the research, about DHA in its preformed state. I've been vegan for 40 years and have never taken a DHA supplement. If it were true that I need a preformed DHA, my brain would have stopped functioning a long time ago. 4 decades, no preformed DHA. It is not necessary. Stop believing the lies. It's fear-based marketing. It is not science. It is not our physiology.